It's time for the last video of this installment. Win-loss picks for every division. We're talking AFC West. Welcome to Nice and Blunt. My name is Adam Riacho. We're going to begin with the reigning back-to-back Super Bowl champions, Kansas City Chiefs. And sadly, it kind of feels a bit inevitable that their three-peat takes off. But can anyone stop them? Let's take a look. They start off week one, Thursday Night Football, the season opener against Baltimore, and I think they actually lose this game. There are some issues with their receiving core, especially Rashee Rice, probably going to be suspended given his off-the-field issues, and they also lost L'Jarius Sneed at cornerback. So Hollywood Brown needs to get off to a good start. It is a revenge game for him, but I'm a little worried about Xavier Worthy in his first NFL game. I think the Derrick Henry addition makes Baltimore a bit of a nightmare. And if the Ravens are entirely healthy week one, I think they get some revenge on that loss in the AFC Championship game. So I think they lose kind of like last year to Detroit and L in week one, but I don't think it really derails them at all. I think they get rolling right away after that. In week two, they take on Cincinnati at home, and I do think they exercise some demons. They have lost a lot of games against Joe Burrow, but I don't think it happens here. With some extra few days to prepare, I think they get back to winning football. So a win in week two, and then on the road at Atlanta, I do think they beat Kirk Cousins pretty comfortably. So a win in week three. In week four at the Chargers, they dominate the Chargers, especially in Los Angeles. So Travis Kelce going to go ham as always in this one, and I do expect a win over Jim Harbaugh. So 3-1, followed by a game against the Saints at home, and Derek Carr has played well against them in the past, but I don't think it matters. I'm definitely taking the Chiefs. To go 4-1, entering the bye, they will beat New Orleans. After the bye, though, they get a Super Bowl rematch at the Niners, and coming off a bye, Andy Reid's record is always really good. So yet another win here in week 7. Following that up, they get a week 8 matchup on the road at Las Vegas, and they lost on Christmas Day to the Raiders, and the Raiders kind of, as an organization, give them some problems. You know, it's a big game for Las Vegas, so I do think they pull the upset. I do see the second L of the year on the road against the Raiders. In week 9, though, Monday Night Football against Baker Mayfield, I think they win at home versus Tampa Bay. And then in week 10 versus Denver, I think they get back to their winning ways. They did lose a game against the Broncos last season, but against Bo Nix and a rookie quarterback, I would not expect that to happen. So a new win streak begins against Denver, and they take it in week 10. I do think that'll be a bit of a blowout. In week 11, though, they travel to the Bills, and you know the Buffalo Bills always play this team very tough, but they're better in the regular season. The Chiefs have their number in the playoffs, but I think the fact that it's in Buffalo is going to go in favor of the Bills. So I think their offense will be rolling, their defense should probably be better, and who knows, maybe some injuries factor in to this L against the Bills, maybe Kadarius Toney is offsides once again. But at this point, I think they've lost their last game of this season. I don't see them losing going forward in this schedule. They get a game against Carolina on the road. That's a win, pretty much automatic. Week 13, Black Friday game. I think they do beat the Raiders. They will not get swept, so that's a win. Week 14, Sunday Night Football versus the Chargers. I see another win. Even at home, where the Chargers play a little bit better, I'm not worried about this matchup. I think they will deal Jim Harbaugh 2 L's this season. So they sweep the Chargers. Week 15, though, they go on the road at Cleveland, and I do think they beat the Browns. I do think Mahomes is much more trustworthy than Deshaun Watson. And then in week 16, this is probably the only questionable game here in the back end of their schedule, but I do think they beat the Texans at home on Saturday, week 16. If it was in Houston, maybe I'd give it to the Texans, but they know how to shut down Stephon Diggs. I think they can handle Joe Mixon, and I think at that point their receiving core will be rolling. The offense is going to be a nightmare to deal with for the Chiefs this year. So I'm giving them a win week 16. Then week 17 on Christmas Day, a Wednesday, they do take on the Steelers, and I have no confidence in Russell Wilson or most likely Justin Fields at quarterback. I'm giving them yet another win, followed by a win at Denver. I do think they sweep the Broncos and finish 14-3. So they lose week 1, but only twice more after that, and they're just racking up win after win. Their defense is going to be at worst top 10, if not top 5 again this season, and I do think their offense is way, way better than last year with a much improved wide receiver core. Hollywood Brown, I think, will have an excellent statistical season in fantasy football. I want him on my roster. Let's move on, though, to the Chargers, who finished last place in this division last year, but do have a lot of hype surrounding their new coach, and Jim Harbaugh is definitely going to make a difference from a cultural standpoint. The roster is the question, though. They let go of some important pieces at wide receiver, and they're only looking at like Ladd McConkey, Josh Palmer as the top 2. I mean, I have no confidence in Quentin Johnston. I would be happily surprised if he's not a bum, but I don't expect much from DJ Chark. And the run game, while it's a big part of their scheme, the Greg Roman offense does love to run the ball. Do you really trust Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, the rookie Kimani Vidal, or Isaiah Spiller that much? It's hard to feel like tremendously confident, but their defense still has a lot of good weapons, and I think there will be a lot of close games like last year that go in their favor instead of going the wrong way. So Jim Harbaugh is going to turn this thing around and hopefully provide a winning culture and identity. But in week 1, I think they get a bit of a break versus the Raiders at home. Khalil Mack owns this matchup. It's a revenge game for him, and I expect a lot of sacks against Gardner Minshew for Khalil Mack. So they win in week 1 on the strength of their defense, and then in week 2 they travel to Carolina, where I do think they shut down Bryce Young and the Panthers. So they start off red hot, 2-0, excellent break in the schedule, like 2 very winnable games right off the bat. But then they travel to Pittsburgh, and I'm not going to take them to win. I'm going to give them an L against Mike Tomlin and Russell Wilson. But in week 4, I think it's kind of a clear wake-up call. They're not on the same level as a Super Bowl caliber team. They lose to the Chiefs in week 4, but an early bye allows them to regroup, see what they did well, what they did poorly, and fix some mistakes. In week 6, they get a rookie quarterback on the road. Bo Nix will not beat them. In week 6, they get the win. However, in week 7, on the road at Arizona, their first primetime game, Monday Night Football against Kyler Murray, I am taking the Cardinals. I think the Cardinals offense is much improved. They're not going to have much of an answer for Marvin Harrison Jr., and the Cardinals roster, I think, will give them some problems. So Kyler Murray gets the win, an L for the Chargers in week 7. However, I think there's some winnable games here right after that. Versus New Orleans, they know how to shut down Derek Carr. I'm going to give them a win at home versus the Saints. And then in week 9, this one can really go either way. I think it's a coin flip, but on the road, I think they beat Deshaun Watson. A bit of an upset, but I think their run game gets it done. And call me crazy, but I think they win versus the Browns. In week 10, though, I think the Titans have their number. The Titans are going to have a rough start to their season, and this is a bit of a trap game. I think the Titans will be like 0-8 at this point and really desperate for a win. And historically, they have given this organization some problems. So an L in week 10, a home game that doesn't really equate to a home crowd, an unfortunate loss in week 10 for the Chargers. But then they get the Bengals at home, and I'm definitely taking Joe Burrow. I don't think we can hang with Cincinnati. I am a Chargers fan, in case I haven't mentioned that already. And then they get a Monday night matchup, week 12, versus John Harbaugh, the Har Bowl here in Los Angeles, and I'm taking the Ravens. I think the Ravens have a much better roster at this point in time, and that defense is going to be too difficult to overcome. So 3 straight L's, very unfortunate, but then they go on the road at the Falcons, and I think they turn it around. I think they can beat Kirk Cousins. Their defense will show up and give him some problems. So a bit of an upset win week 13, and then in week 14, they go on the road Sunday Night Football at the Chiefs, and I do think they get swept by Kansas City. So yet another L, their 7th of the year, but I think they have some winnable matchups at the end of the season. I'm giving them a win. Week 15 versus Tampa at home against Baker Mayfield. I think their defense steps up. In week 16 versus Denver, I'm giving them a sweep of the Broncos. I could definitely be wrong about this. The Broncos have given the Chargers some issues, but this is where I think the Jim Harbaugh effect takes place. Those tight games that come down to a field goal are going to start to go in their favor. This one will be very close, but I'm taking my Chargers. In week 17 at the Patriots, kind of like last year, going to be a low-scoring game, but I think they shut down the Patriots offense, hold them to less than 2 touchdowns, and they get the win, albeit it will be ugly. In week 18, though, this will be a game where they're trying to get into the playoffs. At 9 wins, it's definitely possible, but I just don't think they hit 10, and I'm giving them a loss week 18 at the Raiders. I don't think it'll be as big of a blowout as last year's Vegas Raiders game was. I mean, that's when Staley got fired. We all remember that game, but I just don't think it happens for the Chargers. They will not sweep Las Vegas this season. So 9-8, a decent record, definitely much better than last year where they only had 5 wins, but just not good enough in the tough AFC to make it to the playoffs. 9-8 is my prediction for the Chargers in year 1 with Jim Harbaugh. Maybe it's 10, but I could definitely see 7 as well on this schedule. I might have given a couple of games to them that they might not win, like that Browns game. That could not go in their favor. And then that Falcons or Tampa game. Those ones are going to be close. One of those I might be wrong about. But let's move on to the Raiders, who had a very interesting close to their season, very competitive with interim coach Antonio Pierce, who's now the full-time coach. So there's some definite cohesion, some good chemistry in that locker room, but I just don't trust the quarterback. Aiden O'Connell might retain the job, but I do fully expect it to be Gardner Minshew. And Minshew was competitive with Shane Steichen as his coach last year, but it's not the same equation. The Raiders will not have the same type of play calling as the Colts did. So I'm worried about that, and their defense still kind of scares me. I don't know if Brock Bowers is going to be the secret weapon that they need to unleash this offense. So week 1 at the Chargers, I'm giving them an L. I'm taking my Chargers. In week 2, though, at Baltimore, I don't see it. I'm definitely taking the Ravens. The Ravens are way better overall. So 2 straight L's. And then they come back home for their home opener versus Carolina. And I do think they beat Bryce Young. I do think they're better than the Panthers. So first win of the season, followed by a home game against Cleveland, and I think the Browns defense really is just too much to handle. So tough matchup there, an L, their third of the year, followed by a road game at Denver, where I think the Broncos pull the upset. It's the home field advantage I think Denver needs, and in division, anything can happen. I think the Broncos pull it together, and Sean Payton has a very good game plan. The run game really steps up for Denver. So 4th L of the year for Las Vegas, followed by a home game against Pittsburgh. And I'm actually giving them the win. I think they can upset the Steelers. They know some of Russell Wilson's weaknesses in Vegas. So 2nd win of the year in week 6, followed by a Thursday night football game, their first primetime matchup of the season at the LA Rams. And I'm taking the Rams, especially at SoFi. I think Stafford and McVay get it done. But in week 8, I'm giving them the upset victory versus the Chiefs. They always play Kansas City tough, and this one's going to be a close barn burner, an upset win for the Raiders. They're going to be competitive in all of these games, but I think it's going to take some type of good luck for them to get it done. Maybe the kickoff rules are a factor that help them win this matchup. So they're third of the year, starting to get a little momentum, but then I think it kind of comes crashing down at the Bengals. I think they lose to Joe Burrow entering the Week 10 bye. So they regroup, try to figure out what's going well, what's not. But at Miami, I don't see it happening. I'm taking Tua and Mike McDaniel. That run game going to be very hard to stop, along with Tyreek Hill of the Dolphins. So yet another L, but then they come home versus Denver, and they will not get swept by the Broncos. They do win at home in week 12. In week 13, they get a Monday Night Football game at the Chiefs, and I don't see them sweeping. They're definitely going to lose one of these games, if not both. So an L in week 13, followed by a road game at Tampa Bay, where I think the Bucs give them some problems. So an L week 14 once again, but they do get 3 home games out of the last 4 to close out the season. I do think they win versus Atlanta. The Falcons are historically not as good of a team on the road, so I think in the Dome, Gardner Minshew plays well, and Devontae Adams gives the Falcons secondary some issues. So a win in Week 15, followed by a loss, in my opinion, Week 16 versus Jacksonville. Tough matchup. It is a revenge spot here for Minshew, but it's also an organization that knows how to give him some problems. Maybe Aiden O'Connell is the quarterback at that point. With all these L's, I wouldn't be surprised by a pivot at that position. So an L Week 16 followed by a road game at New Orleans, and it's a revenge game for Derek Carr. I'm giving it to the Saints. The Saints are not a team I'm really buying into this year, but I think this is one of the games they play up to competition, and it's a close one, but I'm going to take New Orleans. Last game of the season, though, Week 18 versus the Chargers. I do think they get some revenge. They will not get swept by LA, and they win their 6th of the year in the final week of the season. Keep the Chargers out of the playoffs. So 6-11 is my prediction for Las Vegas. We'll see what happens, but at least in division, they do go 3-3. But lastly, let's talk about the Broncos, who were kind of interesting last year. They did pull some upset wins, and Russell Wilson played better than some of us expected, but took too many sacks last year and just didn't do enough on offense. He averaged like barely 200 yards passing per game. So I do think they made a long-term improvement pivoting to Bo Nix. I do actually like Bo Nix as a player, and given his experience in college, I think he's actually going to start off decent. I don't expect too much of a rookie learning curve for Bo Nix. So that's why I think they actually have a chance Week 1 at Seattle. We saw this matchup a couple of years ago when Russell Wilson made his Broncos debut, and I think Sean Payton is going to be way better prepared for this matchup than Nathaniel Hackett was, and I'm just not a full believer in the rookie head coach for the Seahawks. I am not a believer in Geno Smith, and part of me kind of questions if Ryan Grubb's college offense actually translates well to the NFL. So I see a bit of an upset here. I think Bo Nix gets off to the right foot and wins in Week 1. I'm giving the Broncos a win on the road at Seattle. In Week 2, though, I'm definitely taking an L versus Pittsburgh. I know it's against Russell Wilson. They might know how to give him some problems, but I think the Mike Tomlin defense gives Bo Nix way more. So an L in Week 2, a bit of a wake-up call for Bo Nix. And then they travel on the road at Tampa Bay, where I think they lose. I think Baker Mayfield is a better quarterback. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers have an overall better roster as well. They're going to have some issues covering Mike Evans. And then in Week 4, I think they lose yet again their 3rd loss in a row at the New York Jets. They have a terrible, terrible track record against Breece Hall. They've lost 2 straight games against the Jets these last 2 seasons, and Breece Hall has made some house calls from like 60-plus yards out in each of them. So that's going to happen again, just not equipped to stop Breece Hall, and they lose their 3rd in a row. Week 5, though, I do think they take care of business at home versus the Raiders. Interesting divisional matchup, and I think at home that crowd and the altitude gives them the advantage, a win in Week 5. Then they get the Chargers at home, and they've actually been pretty good against LA, but I think the defensive line, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, just gives them too many issues, and Bo Nix takes too many sacks. I'm going to give the Chargers the win, the 4th loss for Denver. In Week 7, though, I do think they have a really good chance here at the Saints. A revenge game for Sean Payton, a big game for him, and I think he proves he's the better coach over Dennis Allen. So a win in Week 7, followed by a win in Week 8. Another NFC South matchup where Sean Payton knows some weaknesses of those opponents. I'm giving the Broncos yet another win. I think Bo Nix will look better than Bryce Young even in his rookie season. So at this point in the year, they're actually 4-4, not bad at 500, is definitely an impressive start to Bo Nix's rookie career, but I don't see too many more wins left in the season. This is where their schedule gets really tough. On the road at Baltimore, no chance I'm taking Lamar Jackson. Then on the road at the Chiefs, and they pulled an upset last year, but I don't think it happens again. Give me an L at Kansas City. Week 12, though, versus Atlanta, the Falcons are not a team that travels super well historically, and I think Kirk Cousins will have some issues against Patrick Surtain. I'm giving them an upset, kind of like other NFC matchups, I think Sean Payton has a few tricks up his sleeve and finds a way to shut down the Falcons. So 5th win of the year, week 12, followed by an L in week 13. I do not expect them to sweep the Raiders. So on the road in that dome, too much crowd noise, and their offense kind of sputters because of the silent count in that matchup. So week 13, that's an L. Week 14, though, versus Cleveland, I'm giving them an upset. I'm not a full believer in Deshaun Watson, and I feel like there's going to be some issues. Maybe Jameis Winston is forced into action and has to start this one. If that's the case, Sean Payton will definitely give him some issues. So a win in upset faction, week 14, followed by a late bye week and a very difficult schedule in the final month of the season. These last 4 games are very difficult. Versus the Colts, I'm taking Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson. I think that offense is humming at that point, so not a fan of the Broncos here. An L versus Indianapolis. And then on the road at the Chargers, maybe they get one of these matchups, but I think they lose both of them. I think they get swept by Jim Harbaugh. I'm giving them an L, week 16 against the Chargers. But last 2 games at the Bengals, no chance. I'm definitely taking Joe Burrow in that one. And then week 18 versus Kansas City, Mahomes will just be too much to handle. That's another L for the Broncos. So 6-11, starting off 6-7 is kind of impressive for Bo Nix, but this last month is just terrible luck. And none of those games go the right way. So 11 losses, 6-11 is tied with the Raiders. This is how I see the division panning out. I do have the Chiefs at number 1. I think they're going to be the number 1 overall seed across the NFL. In the AFC, they get the bye at 14-3. Then I have the Chargers at 9-8, on the cusp of the playoff picture, but just missing out by a win or 2, and definitely an improvement over last year, but not good enough to make the playoffs. Decent, but I didn't want to give them too optimistic of an outlook. Y'all are just going to call me a homer. So 9-8 is the Chargers' record, in my opinion. And then in 3rd place, I have the Raiders, who finished 3-3 in division, followed by the Broncos, 6-11, who finished 1-5 in division. So not great for these bottom 3 teams, but the Chiefs are definitely atop the league, if not just the conference and this division. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button for me and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. If you're interested in any other win-loss videos across the league, all 8 divisions are a part of this playlist here, and you can check that out right now. But my name's Adam Mariancho, and thank you for watching Nice and Blunt.